This week, it was supposed to be double interview Monday, but you can't control traffic. More on that next week. Instead, we dig deep into one of my favorite topics by welcoming Greg Fitzgerald, co-founder and chief experience officer at Sevco Security, and Steve Lodin, vice president information security at Sallie Mae Bank, to discuss how vulnerability prioritization can produce better business outcomes. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly.
Not all vulnerabilities are the same. A critical vulnerability on a marketing laptop isn't the same risk as a critical vulnerability on a production server accessed by a domain admin missing EDR. Sevco Security shows you these interconnected risks. Sevco centralizes intelligence on all your devices, identities, software, vulnerabilities, and security controls, enriching them with threat intelligence and business context in real time, so your security team has exactly what it needs to effectively prioritize and remediate vulnerabilities based on the unique requirements of your business. Think of it as a to-do list for risks, but less annoying. Find a smarter way to manage exposures. Visit securityweekly.com/Sevco today. Imagine a world where every threat, ransomware, supply chain attacks, zero-day exploits is stopped before it can even begin. ThreatLocker makes that world a reality with a zero-trust approach to cybersecurity. By giving you granular control on every executable that can happen in your environment, ThreatLocker protects your business around the clock. No more guessing, no more gaps. Just rock-solid protection that keeps your operations running smoothly and your data secure. Discover how ThreatLocker's least privilege approach can safeguard your organization against known and unknown threats. Take the first step towards total peace of mind. Visit securityweekly.com/ThreatLocker today. Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 389, recorded March 31st, 2025. I am your host, Matt Alderman. Joining me for the interviews today are my co-hosts. First, Mr. Jason Albuquerque. Almost draft time, buddy.
Hey, listen, my Patriots made a move. Stephon Diggs, baby. We just brought him in. So we're making moves, man. But at the end of the day, it's March Madness Final Four time.
I know.
Texas Tech took a loss to Florida. I am so sorry, Matt.
They had them up until, 3 minutes left in that game. They're up by like 8 points. I think they ran out of gas because they had to go overtime. The previous game, I think they just ran out of gas.
I know, man. I was having like that Adam saying, "You blew it. You blew it."
Yep. And when was...
I'm taking Duke, man. I'm taking Duke.
Both Duke and Houston look really, really good. When was the last time we saw all four number ones make it to the Final Four?
Seriously.
Right? It's been a while.
It's been a while. This is going to be good.
Yeah. Also joining Mr. Ben Carr. Welcome, Ben.
Hey, Matt. How you doing today? Fine. Monday, little interview session. Looking forward to it. Let's have some discussion.
Yeah, we're going to have some fun. First, quick announcement. Identiverse 2025 is returning to Las Vegas June 3rd to 6th. Hear from over 250 expert speakers and connect with over 3,000 identity security professionals across 4 days of keynotes, breakout sessions, and deep dives into the latest identity security trends, plus take part in hands-on workshops and explore the brand new non-human identity pavilion. Register now and save 25% with code IDV25-Security Weekly by visiting securityweekly.com/IDV2025. This segment is sponsored by Sevco Security. To learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/Sevco. Greg Fitzgerald is the Chief Experience Officer and co-founder of Sevco Security. He is a veteran IT and security executive with successful tours at Tipping Point, BMC Software, Fortinet, and SourceFire. Greg was also the founding CMO at Cylance and Jask, and has been a great friend of Security Weekly for a long time, so it's fun to have him on. Joining Greg today is Steve Lodin, Vice President, Information Security and Corporate Security at Sallie Mae Bank. Steve is focused on managing governance of identity and access management, perimeter security, vulnerability management, and threat intelligence to reduce risk and ensure compliance. Gentlemen, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Happy to be here.
Thank you.
All right, love this topic. There was another thing, Greg, I forgot to mention, tipping point. So quick history, just, I don't know when you were at Tipping Point. I was there early on. I actually bought the McAfee introvert box to put in the lab in Austin to actually test performance between the Tipping Point box and the McAfee box way back in the day. Love that product. I'm a huge fan.
Yeah, it was awesome. I was in the early days. It was great.
All right. So we go way back further than I thought we did, which was mostly through Security Weekly. But this topic, vuln prioritization and the challenges around it, I'll kind of preface this conversation just quickly for you guys to jump in. This is a topic we've been talking about for a long time. I shared right before this interview in January 2015, I laid out a vision for where vulnerability management prioritization should go. And here we are 10 years later, and it's probably been a little longer. We're still not there. Why aren't we there?
Well, I'll go ahead and start. Go Boilers. Sorry to see the loss. The game was incredible. Just the last second. And you mentioned Identiverse. I've got part of my team going there. So happy for the sponsorship there. I started vulnerability scanning. You guys are going to freak out. I started vulnerability scanning in 1995 and 96 when Satan was released, if you remember that.
Mm-hmm.
System administrator tool for analyzing networks. I was a beta tester. I took down production lines at General Motors where I worked at the time by doing that because none of them were ready for a vulnerability scanner. Scanning's changed a little bit at the time, but not much over what is that now, 30, 40 years. The problem is scanning is virtual or is basic hygiene. Everybody needs to do it. They know they need to do it. Finding the time and availability of their remediation teams is still a challenge.
Yeah, I was an ISS user, 1996, 97, roughly the same time frame, before I went to Nessus. And anyways, but you're right. Scanning is scanning, but the challenge I see, Greg, and maybe you can elaborate on this a little bit, is vulnerabilities for the sake of vulnerabilities isn't enough to really drive the right outcomes. And I think that is the biggest challenge still facing a lot of organizations.
Very much so. What we see, as you both have recognized over your past 30 plus years, is that vulnerability scanning needs context, right? And the concept around context is just because there's something that's reported as a software vulnerability that needs to be patched. It really comes into this overwhelming just abundance of those alerts on a daily basis that is physically impossible to fix. And the other element is no vulnerability is the same. I mean, in terms of equal priority. And when you talk about prioritization, what we did at Sevco was we realized there's two major problems, because I've been on the vendor side my entire career. And thank you to Steve Lodin, who understands on the business practice side, understands the value of a tool and what it can really bring to making the more security posture forward and more efficient and effective. And in today's day and age, we already know there's not enough people, not enough skills, and we're working with the best we can, but we have an overabundance of these alerts because there's a bazillion tools. And so what we set out to build was a way to make it so that the users, the operators, can realize what's important and what's not important. And that's relative to the context of knowing if that vulnerability, one, really has relevance to that organization at all. And then when you tie it down more specifically to the user, the device, the operating system on the device, the applications that are on the device, and realize, do I need to get that now? Can I bundle it and package it with a mass update and that'll be fine too? Or can I just ignore it, right? I give a real hard example was we recently had an example where a Chrome vulnerability came out and everybody started to just freak out at the organization. And we said, wait a minute, most of your organization's using Firefox. So don't even worry about the Chrome vulnerability. You'll need to get to it. But from a use standpoint, your user base is working on something else. And all of a sudden, the stress levels went down. The prioritization could be put to something else. So we see that on a daily basis.
So Greg, Steve, one of the things we talk about a lot on this show that I think has some roots to the challenge that organizations are having with this. We've talked about it on Say Easy, Do Hard so many times. It's the basic asset management pieces that organizations are doing really poorly at. Knowing their assets, discovering their assets, prioritizing their assets, classifying them, associating a risk score or category to them, and then being able to prioritize what they need to remediate first, second, third, what can wait till a monthly patch, what needs to be remediated immediately. That level of context is what we call the do hard, because it takes a lot of elbow grease. So what are organizations doing now to maybe realize some economies of scale instead of trying to bulldog through it all the time? Is there anything they've been doing to help get some economies of scale, do it quicker, make themselves more efficient, but do the hard work up front?
Yeah, Greg, let me start on that, and you can follow up with the right way to do it. You guys are absolutely right. Knowing assets is critical. It's number one on the CIS top 20, top 18, whatever it is. It's also one of the most challenging pieces.
Mhm.
So, for us, we have a CMDB that's partially completed, not accurate. I think you've heard that story many times. And then we have like, let's say 10 other inventory tools that we take a look at. Now, in our security controls maturity, we're supposed to make sure that we've got our security agents on all assets. So you have to know all assets to then validate. And we spent a lot of time doing spreadsheet by spreadsheet by spreadsheet by spreadsheet evaluations to these are the assets. Are they running agents? With Sevco, we've got that down to connecting and integrating all of our security tools and all of our inventories and then producing that report. We used to call it Hell Week, where we were spending all the time taking all these inventory tools and coming up with these are the systems missing our agents, opening ServiceNow tickets to get the operations teams to update them. With Sevco, it's really once periodically push the button, all the reports are pushed out, tickets generated, just like that.
Thanks, Steve. I'm glad to hear you really like the product that well. You're perfect because you understand the challenge that we were trying to solve, which is there's basically different disparate databases all over the place that they don't even talk to each other. And without talking to each other, it leaves huge risk gaps in the organization of what controls coverage there are, or what policy coverages there are, and what vulnerabilities there are. And one of the magic is not only tying into every tool or system you've got, but being able to deduplicate, deconflict, normalize, and parse that data, that your team is already using for simple reports that that's what I need to know on a daily basis. This is great. Or on a quarterly basis for what I need to understand my posture. So then I can take action. You mentioned one thing, Matt, earlier, which is, over 35 years or so, why haven't the vulnerability tools done this, right? Even with Tenable One and with Rapid7, they say it, but they don't do it. So one of the biggest challenges for me on the vendor side is marketing says one thing, but the tools do another. And that is the most confusing thing for the customers and the buyers. And we've been very sincere and authentic to what we do and what we can't do. And in that vein, being able to say, look, that's our magic, is being able to make it so that you can pull all these tools together. And for whatever reason, they may or may not be able to integrate. They may not be able to deduplicate. Their systems are, frankly, very tired and very old, if you think about the tool sets we just talked about. And they're not modernized. So we, Sevco, had to come on top of all these tools so that we can ingest and make it basically a next gen view of the entire organization and what it's doing.
So you mean the IPv4 address is not the holy grail of asset identifiers?
Yeah, let me talk a little bit about that. We're really dynamic environment. At any point in time, we have 10,000 assets at this point in time. But over the past month, we've had 40,000 assets. We cycle our AWS servers sometimes every 15 minutes, new IPs, new names, new everything. And the challenge in that dynamic environment, especially when you're also spinning up BDIs for call center agents and spinning them down, all of that type of dynamic environment really makes it difficult to know what's a current asset, what's an old asset, and get audit out of the old assets into current. That's a challenge for us.
Yeah, and I'm curious, Greg, how Sevco is solving that, right? Because this is the age-old problem that everybody's been struggling with, right? Which is assets coming up and down all the time, synchronizing those, deduplicating those to really understand what your asset profile looks like. Like this is the foundation, people. Like at the end of the day, if you don't have this information, everything else we're going to talk about in this interview is not going to help you, right?
That's
So
right.
how do Greg, how does Sevco help kind of do that reconciliation?
Yes, great question. The real idea behind that is basically being able to take the metadata from all these tools and systems, right? So that we get the device name, all the system information about that device, the IP address, the operating system, versions of the operating system. Then we move into the applications and what's on that particular device. Again, these devices can be laptops, they can be a television network, it can be a printer, it can be a remote access user that's using their own personal device, iPhones, iPads, computers that technically don't have controls on them because they're not controlled by the organization. Sevco is able to tap into all of the tool systems and gather those disparate pieces of information, right? That then creates a picture around that particular asset. And when I say an asset, to me, it could be a user, an application, a device, or the vulnerability, and then be able to cross search that, which ends up being almost physically impossible to do it in a human way. So we've automated all of that. And that's our particular magic and our uniqueness. And then to be able to display it in our UI for users, and those users can be everything from deep threat research, IR guys, to the simple project manager that's trying to say, how much do I actually have to pay my EDR vendor from a license standpoint? So the use cases are broad, but as you mentioned, this is the foundation of what one needs to have. And then after that, then you take it to another level. Steve and his team, Sallie Mae, very much a forward-thinking, very progressive security mindset. It's like, I've got the best tools that I can buy in the market. I got the best people, and yet we still know that we're not gathering everything under one roof real time. And so the real time is really big for Sevco. Relative to competition and others provide it, we're looking at it as fast as that device that we can pull from, we take it. Others will do it maybe once a day, once a week, once a month, right? Once is not enough. And as Steve knows, like he can push the button at any time and he's going to get the most accurate reading of his environment right then and there and not have to batch things or wait for a response of the tool or go to do more manual work to get there.
The threat landscape is constantly evolving, making it nearly impossible for security teams to keep up. That's why so many top companies turn to Tines, a security orchestration and automation platform built by security practitioners for security practitioners. Tines empowers analysts and engineers to automate their most repetitive, time-consuming tasks. No coding expertise required, just the flexibility to tailor workflows to your team's exact needs. Ready to break free from the limitations of traditional tools? Learn more at securityweekly.com/Tines.
So Greg, quick question for you. You mentioned earlier that the platform kind of ties all of these other third-party applications that may have together, brings all the context back. What about an asset that hits the network that maybe one of those tools hasn't seen yet?
That's a great question. And people ask us that a lot because we are API only. And so what will typically happen is by gathering information, say off the network wire or DHCP or DNS or off the network itself that may or may not be an application, we are gathering enough information. It could be as simple as the IP address, or it could be some element of the packet that we see that has data that then, when reconciled with the other tools that are out there, might add more context around it, and then it's identifiable, as a matter of fact. So we get that a lot when people are looking at external to internal attacks. So they'll look external attack surface management, and they're like, okay, we're looking for the outside, and we see some device or some users. But what we find on the inside, after they've done their red team or others, it might just be hitting a firewall. That's all it is, right? I'm like, there's nothing behind that. And so we're able to provide all that insight. And again, the magic of being able to do that is because we're taking information from different tools and putting that puzzle piece together. And that's really what allows us to see devices that maybe nobody's ever seen before, but we've been able to recognize it and add some sort of knowledge. Now, it might still be basic, but it allows one to realize I actually need to worry about that, or prioritization, I don't, right? And that really just helps the organization.
So Greg, this problem has been around for forever, right? We've seen it a lot from the legacy side of legacy infrastructure, right? And it's surprising to me that it hasn't been solved. Matt and I both worked at Qualys for a while. This was like, we worked at Tenable. Like this is a big part of the industry problem, right? But what's even more so now is cloud assets, right? And this transition outside of environment where you have control over. So, those are also assets as well, right? Cloud services, cloud applications. Like, how do you handle that?
Well, that's a great question because we do look at cloud as just another asset class. So when we're looking at tapping into Wiz, for example, or an EC2 instance, we're able to jump into that same repository and grab, again, the elements of that application or those particular access rights for people that have that, because we do capture the identity as well. So we're able to help, again, provide it a one big picture, your cloud assets as you use them, again, in as much of real time as we can.
All right, Steve. So I'm going to dig into the other two dimensions. We've got the foundation, which is assets. We've added the vulnerability layer. Let's go to the next layer, controls, configuration from a compliance perspective, right? You own that side. So that's the other dimension of data that has to come in here, right? Because here's the age-old kind of debate. Is that vulnerability exploitable because I have a compensating control in place or I don't, right? Let's talk through like how does now configuration tie into this, because that's that other dimension we need to think about.
Yeah. Let's give me your third so I don't steal your thunder later.
Well, your third one is risk, because you got to reduce risk, right?
Okay. So besides configuration, I think the context of the security tools you have in place today also make a difference. So in terms of context, you should be doing some CIS benchmarks applied to the systems to make sure that they're not configured stupidly, and that developer that has local admin has gotten rid of all your controls. You need to be monitoring that. So basic security controls out of the CIS benchmarks is really pretty important. Assessing every system, not just the ones that are servers. You got to do the endpoints as well. Again, know your asset inventory, scan them all. But back to the security tools. If you're like every other organization, you've spent millions of dollars over the years on firewalls, on secure web gateways, on EDRs and AV and anti-malware. Do those tools in their current configuration block the attack coming from the outside? Does having CrowdStrike on your endpoint mean that they've got a new configuration sent out to block that? Does your firewall running an IDS or IPS have it in block mode, not just alert mode? If the answers to those are yes, then your risk shrinks. You're not really fully exploitable by missing all these controls that you spent millions of dollars on. So what's your ROI on those tools is really critical in this stage.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important part is we see this and we talk about this on the show. Average CISO has 75 tools. We've seen numbers range all over, but how much are those tools deployed? To what depth, right? Are you getting all the benefits out of those investments? Are your EDRs and your firewalls and all the other things you spent money on configured correctly in an environment that can actually help prevent some of these? And that means you have to understand how these devices are configured and what the configuration state of those look like, as well as maybe the endpoints, right?
Yep. And that's integrations back into those tools to not only see, do they have it on the system, but how is it configured?
Yeah. Great. And then I gotta go to the risk side, because we talk risk management a lot. Context around risk matters in this context, in this discussion, right? Because if I'm talking about a vulnerability that might be exploitable on a development box, I may not care. But if that vulnerability is exploitable on one of my critical assets, I care, because I have potential impact quantified somewhere probably on that device, right? And so we can't forget about the risk conversation, can we? Because that's how you're going to influence the prioritization, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So knowing the criticality of the asset is hard, just like finding the assets. knowing who owns them and what the criticality is hard. It's pretty easy to say non-prod versus prod.
Yeah.
But you talked about may not worry on non-prod. Go back to what's the control environment around it. Do you have lateral movement? If that's
What's the interconnected
non-prod,
nature of it?
yeah. Lateral movement, security groups, firewall, internal firewalls, all of that could help reduce the risk. But I still say in most environments, you get access to all non-prod and it's all there. So lateral movement's a big deal if you want to take advantage of that and exploit low to medium type of vulnerabilities on non-prod systems that you're not worried about.
It's also interesting because the pushback you get from a lot of operational teams, at least in my experience, has been, hey, it's really hard to patch because it's in production, right? Well, great. Like, okay, we've got all these low things in non-prod, like fix non-prod then? and then that still doesn't get traction, right? So it's a devil's bargain to get any movement, right?
How many non-prods actually look like prod? So your test, right? Your testing there is usually pretty crappy to compare.
And if they really are production representative, wouldn't you want to patch there first to see what the impact will be when you actually patch in prod?
Absolutely. And that's why organizations are going more agile. They're using blue greens on their servers so they can swap them in and out and swap them back if something happens. In our case, we have a set of blue greens, but we also have a set of golden AMIs. We make sure that AMI that they build their systems off either nightly, hourly, weekly, monthly is secure and patched. So they just take it and run. So there's a lot of other options besides I can't afford downtime to patch.
Yeah. So we talked a lot about the foundation, knowing your assets, knowing your inventory. We talked a lot about the context that you need to build that bigger, broader picture. We talked about risk and risk classification and exposure of those assets and being able to prioritize them. What about intelligence? What about integration of threat intelligence into this whole ecosystem? How important is that?
For us on our side, it's really important. We're financial services, so we're heavily tied into FSISAC. We shared bidirectionally with our partners on intelligence, and we need to know rapidly when another bank's getting hit by some vulnerability, does that affect us? And so that's that intelligence sharing with us to identify issues and criticality is really important.
Greg, he talked about lateral movement and the connectiveness of this data. I'm curious how Sevco helps kind of visualize some of that, because there's a lot of elements here, right? Which makes this a little complex sometimes to understand. How are you kind of visualizing some of this back to make it really digestible and easy for clients to use? Because at the end of the day, the goal of this is to drive a better business outcome, which means it has to be really understandable and kind of self-explained to make it easy for Steve and others to like take action off of it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, going to that point, going back to the threat intel, I mean, we absorb that same threat intel and it goes into our threat exposure module and allows you to see immediately what was the threat, who was created by, what's the report on it, how critical is it, gives you all that context, regardless of what tool you're using. Again, we're just absorbing that information and applying it in a single user interface. And when you get into lateral movement, we actually have a module or a screen, I should say, that's all around the network diagram, right? So you can get real sophisticated ones, obviously, for individual network tools and pieces. But again, within the Sevco console, to simplify it all, we're like, wait a minute. These are the devices that are connected to one another, right?
All that interesting served up information he talks about that we'll take a look at is we got to make sure that all of our tools are in there on a system. So there's a nice little dashboard with color-coded agents on all the systems. And we're hooking remotely via API into our cloud posture management tool, our EDR tool, our IDP tool, our secure web gateway. They're all connected in to make sure that we've got assets on them. But the other really interesting thing is they keep track of OS. So if you want to know your EOL or EOS really quickly, or for us, we're on our transition to Windows 11. You want to know what systems are running Windows 11? It's 2 clicks and you're there.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's it. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, the use cases of having that information on one central system is huge relative to that. When we talked about audit, being able to, we have a couple of big customers in that are highly regulated that are like, Greg, you saved my ass like 4 times last year. I was like, how did that happen? They're like, dude, the auditor came in and he wanted to know about X, right? Devices and users and access rights. And he goes, normally we'd have people running around, and if I get one thing wrong, that dude is freaking pulling that string, and it's just a nightmare. And is going to the board and saying, we can't finish the audit because we still got to do our IT stuff. He goes, with us, click the button, right? So that audit use case is fantastic for us. Licensing use case, like I said, incident response use cases, just general visibility of what you're doing with security posture management, as mentioned overall, and playing in that bigger wrapping section of all the tools and systems one already has. So we're augmenting in essence, we're augmenting and enhancing the investments already made. A lot of people go, Greg, well, we can't buy you because we got to get rid of something. I'm like, well, you're not even using the doggone tools you got right first. Second of all, it might be a little bit more expensive, but you're going to find out things that you aren't using to their fullest potential. I'll get that in the identity access management space. Great example. We see access to applications, right? Because again, a user is an asset. The application's an asset. We're seeing connectivity between them and be like, you know what? We didn't even know that they were accessing that application. We now need to augment our sale point, right? Or we need to take our cyber art or make these tools more productive because that's what they're designed for, privileged access management, but people are getting to stuff without that control. And so again, it's some visibility that captures all these either odd use cases, general use cases, and as Steve said, these are just basic fundamental hygiene. And as we move forward, I think it's been ignored. And when we say it hasn't been around for 35 years, because frankly, it's hard, right? And it's also a mundane part of the job, right? And I'd rather just go protect things and be building new apps, not having to go back and look for misconfigurations and people slipping through the cracks, right? That's not the fun part of the job. So I think that's what we've been able to build as a solution, and we're seeing dramatic uptake. I'll give credit to the entire market. Is we're seeing lots of vendors getting into this threat exposure management space. Now, again, marketing versus reality, and we've been doing this for 5 years, and our team are experts from all parts of the network. You can look at the backgrounds of everybody, but my co-founder, JJ, and I, he was first engineer, Carbon Black. I was at Cylance. I've been network side. He's been on network side. He was on the attacker side, as a matter of fact, for the U.S. government. So totally understands the inside, outside, cloud, remote elements of a network. And so being able to pull it together seems to be, the magic.
Yeah, well, you got to understand it, because if you don't understand it, you're not going to drive the right outcomes. And I think that's been the challenge here. I like your one-click audit analogy. If you do it right, folks, that's one of your outcomes. One-click audit. Greg, Steve, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
If you want to learn how to drive better business outcomes with vulnerability prioritization, please visit securityweekly.com/Sevco. Thank you, gentlemen, as always. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.